All right, so thank you, Avanesh, and thanks to Pete, and thanks also to Caroline. So we've got time for some questions now. I don't know if anybody's gone on the Slido. No? Okay. So, all right, well, never mind. That's a shame. But anyone got any questions to ask at that point? I mean, I think Avanesh has made a good point that sometimes it's kind of difficult when you haven't had a chance to engage, and you may well have questions that come up later, which is fine, and he's given you a way to come back with those. We do want to try and make sure we can provide you with that support through data access. Yeah.
Could you just hold until we get to
sorry, Janine.
the mic?
Got a microphone. So just, if you could say who you are, just because we're recording this and where you're from, and then thank you, Claire.
Claire Dominant, Ministry of Health. Ministry of Social Development, sorry. I was wondering if you could run through the definition of mother again and its relationship to caregiver.
Yes.
And how that relates to your mother IDs.
Yes.
And the implications for matching across data sets. So that's run through a bit more.
That's a good question, Claire, thank you. So let me start by sort of defining how we think about mother for the complete data set, and then Avanesh may have some things to add in terms of what that means for merging. So the first thing to say is, because we started in pregnancy, our mothers were defined by who was the biological mother of the child. That was the initial description of the mother, and their partner was the social partner of the mother in pregnancy, because we wanted the person who was most likely, actually 99% of them said they were the biological father, but we wanted the person who was going to be around influencing that child's life. That's why that definition was there. And all of these definitions are clear in each of the reports, just to say that, so I'm just going to try and provide a quick summary. Once the children were born, of course, things changed a little bit, because the children became the focus. So at that point, the vast majority of biological mothers stayed the biological mother going forward at 9 months. And in all about 90% of the cases, the partners stayed the same, but in 10% they either disappeared or changed or were new. Yeah. So things started to change, mostly for the dads or the partners at 9 months. But in some cases, some of those children were adopted, some of them were formal adoption, some were whāngai. Some children over time are no longer living with their biological mum or dad or whatever, and they've actually moved to another family. We follow the children. So what that means, if you're looking over time, is that the mother ID and the father ID will change over time, but the child ID won't. So when you link on that child ID back to mother and partner datasets at different time points, one of the things you do need to check before we sort of go back to the definition is, are those IDs the same? And if they're not, that doesn't mean you've got the wrong child, it just means that something is likely to have happened. And some of the other data in the data set should help you understand why that is. And if after all of that looking you still can't work it out, then let us know in case there really is something wrong. But I think that's the least likely reason. It's actually because the mums and dads can change. They can become grandparents or aunties or uncles, or they can become two mothers or two fathers or whatever. So there's emerging diversity, I guess, in terms of who are the two parents of this children, if there are two, because sometimes there's still just one. And that can change too, between 1 and 2. Now, it's a really good question that you ask about the difference between mothers and dads, as we call them, in some of the other work that we do, or partners, or the P in the data sets, and caregivers. So or particularly when we think about primary and secondary caregivers. In some longitudinal studies, mother is synonymous with primary caregiver and father becomes synonymous with secondary caregiver, but we don't think about it like that. These are not synonyms for primary caregiver or secondary caregiver. We're making no judgment about the mother being the primary carer of that child or the father not being the primary carer of that child. And there has been some feedback, particularly in this case, where we've engaged with the mothers. The reason we continue to engage with the people we call the mothers is because we want consistency over time at who's answering these questionnaires. And we engage with the partners similarly over time so that we get consistency as well. Who turns out to be the primary and secondary caregiver, which seems to be an issue that comes up, emerges from the questions that we ask. So we're not assuming that mothers have the best information about their children's transition to school, but they are the people who are defined as the mother. Now there's a whole flow chart that defines how we define mother, and that's done at a phone call before every data collection wave. So there is a whole set of questions that will define for you as well as for us who that mother is, or if we're asking dads questions or partners, there's a flow chart as well. We do define it in this particular report as well, and so you'll see that most of them are female, but not all. There are a few mothers who are now male, but most of them are still female. They're not all biological mothers. They can be a mix of different relationships to the children, and they may be different from who was there before. So even that is quite complex, you're quite right. So those are the sort of complexities, and we just call them mothers because it's easier to group them all together like that, and similarly dads. But it's a really good point, and when you're looking at it, it's important to actually look at that. You'll be able to work out what gender they are. You can work out relationships from the questions. You can work out who else is in the household, what's changed, those sorts of things. So actually understanding that before you get into the detail is probably incredibly important. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
I guess just from a purely data point of view, there are a handful. If you were to follow the same child across all time points, you'll be able to see there's a handful where the mum has changed, the mother ID, or the partner ID has changed, only for a handful of kids. And that's for the reasons that Susan just outlined. But that's from, if you're doing this, you might notice that there are a couple of kids who had an ID for mother XXXXX, and then here it's XXXXY. But that's the reason for the change.
Is that helpful, Claire? Does that help?
Yes, that clarified it. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Any other questions that arise from that presentation, or anything else from anybody who's engaged with the data set at this stage? No question is too silly at it. They are complex. Yeah, go for it. We'll just wait for that. Lady with the microphone. Money or the bag, did you say?
Hi, Hannah James from Curriculum Progress and Achievement Work Programme at the Ministry of Education. You mentioned earlier about linking to other data sets and educational data, and so I was just wondering, in context of that, what sort of data you would be drawing on in context education, and where from, and...
Sure, so thank you. So just to go back to that comment, when we link to data sets, because of the way that we recruited our cohort and because it's a longitudinal study, all of the issues that we have with confidentiality, we need explicit consent for parents to link to other data sets outside of what we collect. Mostly those are routine data sets. So right from the beginning, we've got permission from the parents, and it is almost all the parents, given the sort of relationship we have with them, to link to health data and education data so far. Now that's a fairly wide remit. We have to describe that very clearly in terms of what we ask the parents for, and those participant information sheets and things are also available. You can see exactly what we ask for. In the education space, it's pretty much the data that is stored with the Ministry of Education, as well as potentially the Education Review Office, ERO, and ECE centres and so on. So quite a wide range actually that we can potentially access. And we've also asked for permission to get the student number, so the NSN, which we haven't got yet, but we've got permission to link to that, which will help to facilitate that linkage. And we've also asked for permission to engage with the children's teachers so that we can get sort of individualised reports from the teachers about children to triangulate information. Now, all of that is aspirational at the moment. So we have consent, but we haven't had the capacity to go ahead and do that, but we're very keen to do that, and that would absolutely involve partnership, as it has to date, with our agencies, with the Ministry of Education in this case, with different groups of people who are able to, work alongside, because we need that expertise from from the people who know that data better than we do, and then we can bring our data and then we can complement those things. So that's the way we do it at the moment. You know, we're working through processes. Obviously, we set this up, as I think I said earlier, before the IDI was a thing. So we were doing this long before it was sort of, there was a resource to do it. So it's fair to say that we are exploring ways that we can actually make this possible more widely. But we do have issues of, you know, running a study where we need that relationship with families and we need explicit consent. So we're just working through how we do that more in the future, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. But there's plenty that we could do now. It just will take some additional input, additional experts, and probably some collaborations to get it going.
Or you could just shout.
So we can pick you up on recording.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my name's Robert. I'm in the Voices of Children team in Oranga, Tamariki. Just, maybe I missed this before, but are you saying that over time on this longitudinal study, you're tracking the biological mother of the child, even if the child has changed to another caregiver? Is it still the original? Did I get that right? Maybe I was wrong.
Yeah.
You try to continue to interview the mother at the antenatal stage of the right through. Is that right?
So that's a really good question too, and again a slightly complex one, sort of building on from the question from Claire beside you. The antenatal mothers and fathers we do try and keep in touch with, and we have had a process in the past where we've tried to engage with what we've called our NRAPs, non-resident antenatal partners. I mean, in the Who Are Today's Dads project, which is sat alongside this to collect information from the people we would characterise as the fathers of the children of the cohort, that's been done around 72 months through an electronic process as well, we did go back to all of those dads or partners, and we got more partners who were now engaged in the children's lives. So rather than 4,401 who were in the antenatal process, we had 5,712, I think, that were identified going forward. So more dads becoming involved, some of them still the biological dads, some new dads, some others who were acting in a dad-like role. So a very different set. When we engage with one particular data collection wave like this one, though, we're only able to engage with one person who is identified as the mother, and that is the person, again, defined on this flowchart, who is resident with the child most of the time in that mother role. So generally that means they have to be with the child over 50% of the time. It may be somebody who is different from last time, but they are operating in that proxy role if they're not the biological mother. So while we know who's come and gone and whether they're different, we don't have detailed information about parents, really, I suppose is the easiest way to describe it, who have come in and out of the child's life, other than through things like the household grid and through questions we can ask of the current parents and the current child. So that's a whole sort of extra module that one day would be nice to sort of add value to, but at the moment it's really just focusing in on that child and who is in that role with them at a particular time point. Right. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So over time you can track how many changes in the parental situation for any child over.
That's exactly right, yes. So the idea is to understand who has been parenting that child over a period of time. The child is the constant, and then those other relationships may change. Similarly, the relationships or the people in the household may also change, and we track that. So who is in and out of the household, how many households is the child in, actually, which becomes more complicated over time as well, which is where, you know, beyond the antenatal or perinatal phase, it becomes increasingly challenging to be defining who is in the mother role and who is in the father role or the partner role, because children do, over time, you know, have shared houses, shared residences, shared families, and families become more complex. But that's why we just focus in on the child as the sort of the constant person and work out who's around them. Before we go into the field in any capacity, we're always checking back in with the family, given the contact details we had, to try and establish who those people are using an algorithm that's pretty well established, but not straightforward.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Oh, hi, I'm Caroline from Massey University. I just wanted to verify, so you can't at the moment link this data to information in the IDI, is that correct?
That is correct at the moment. We need explicit consent from the families to do that, and that we are looking at how that might be possible and thinking about what we might do in the future. But because we started before the IDI, that wasn't the way we set this up, so now we're having to think about where we're currently at and work through that, and we are working through that at the moment just to work out how that's possible. So at the moment that has to be done through other means, which is the way we manage it now. I think there's also quite a lot of work to be done to understand, as we all do, I think, about the value of linkage to different data sets in the IDI and what it can do to complement the information. One of the challenges we find is we are child-centric. A lot of the stuff in the IDI is centred on an adult. We know who's in the household. Sometimes in the IDI that's collected as a proxy. But look, there's definitely merit in these linkages across different data sets, whether it's the IDI, whether it's other longitudinal data sets and so on. And we really are working to explore how we can make the most of all of that information.
Thank you very much.
Good. Any other burning questions? We will be around for a wee bit now if people want to just ask a question of Avanesh
we'll
or of
just be
Pete
floating
or
around,
Caroline or whatever. And
Or let us know.
so look, I think, I just want to thank the team for putting that together, and thank you for your interest as well. We really do want to encourage you to engage with these data sets, to ask research questions that are able to be answered by this increasingly rich data set. Pete's gone through the process for data access. It may sound onerous, but actually, internationally, and when we compare it to, say, the Statistics Data Lab, it's pretty similar. It really is just a process to protect the anonymity and confidentiality of the families and the children. The Data Access Committee is not there to do a scientific review. They're really just there to check that those anonymity and confidentiality processes are being protected, and similarly just to check that the question that's being asked is in the context of what we can measure in a study like this, and that it will sustain the relationships over time. So I think it's fair to say that we've had hundreds of applications now in various guises. There are lots of ways to engage with this data set. And we've said no once out of hundreds of times, and that was actually, and it wasn't me, the Data Access Committee have said no. Sometimes I do think I'm Dr. No, but not today. It was because the question just didn't work. It wasn't relevant for the context of the study. So, and where things, you can ask questions of us if you're not sure whether a research question is relevant or going to be able to be addressed by the data set, go to the data access at growingup.co.nz, and we can help you to understand whether that question is going to be addressable and so on. So, I'd really encourage you to think about what you can get out of this data set. As I've tried to say in terms of the answer to the education linkage and questions, there's just this rich set of information that is there, and so many questions that can be asked of this, and only so many of us. So we absolutely can't do this on our own. We need partnerships. We need other people working on this information. We need people to be thinking about how they can use it, and we really do encourage that. And we're also very keen, I think, to help with that as much as we can. This is the first step. We're trying to look at also how we can support users differently and potentially better going forward, recognising that it's quite hard and abstract to sort of maybe get your head around some of these things, and as you go through using these data sets, you may come up with other questions. So please do come back to the Data Access website or email address, and then we can work through how to support users. Talk to us if you're not sure whether it's something that you're able to do on your own, or whether you'd like to think about doing it alongside the team, or, for example, with the CRF round that's coming up, Hugh, which is a really good way to support using these data sets. It provides ways that you can be resourced to do this work, which is fantastic. And it also really does facilitate this sort of policy relevant research, which is exactly what we want to come out of this data set. So yeah, I hope that's been useful. Anything else, Hugh? Did you want to add anything, or are you happy?
No, that's great. And, Yeah, hopefully people have seen the flyers.
Yeah, there's a flyer for the CRF round. Please pick that up, and and presumably Hugh, they can either contact.
Yeah, so the formal launch of the fund will be happening on the 3rd of July, but I presume, so there's a link there and an email address there that you can direct any queries from that.
Yeah, it's a really excellent way if you're interested in doing research to have that supported, and it's really, really encourage you to think about that if there's a piece of work that you want to do. You've seen that, the data set is complex, but it's also comprehensive. So if you do want to do a piece of work on it, it's going to take a little bit of time just to get into the data set, and answering the question at the end of the day is the easy bit. It's actually the months of actually getting your head around the data. So I just don't want you to go away and think this is going to be a 5-minute job, but it is worth it, I promise.
I should also add, I think Rob Hodgson mentioned it briefly in his speech earlier today, if you're from an academic institution and you're trying to work out who are some potentially relevant policy partners, please do get in touch with us about that, because we're very keen to help with brokering those relationships and making introductions and so forth. So do please get in touch.
Thank you, Hugh. Okay, so thank you all for coming, and thanks for the questions. They were really valuable, and I'm sure some of you may have some when you go away, so please do come back to us if you need to. Please come back and have a look at that video that will be up on our website very soon, as well as all the other information that's there. And if there's anything else that you feel like you need that you can't find, then please do just contact us through Data Access, and we'll do what we can to help. So thanks very much, and thanks to the team for helping out today. Thanks to Annette, who's here to support us as well. And thank you, Hugh, for being here on behalf of MSD. So, all right, good. Thank you to MSD for the room.